Good morning, on purposers. Give yourself a pat on the back because you are right here, right now, for a reason. Welcome to the On Purpose podcast, where together we will empower ourselves and others to live lives with more passion and purpose. How you doing this morning, Jared?
I'm great. I'm glad to be back here with you, man. I feel like I didn't get enough time with you last week. I know you were off tending to your grandma, so I think that's honorable, and I love giving grace to our previous generation and helping them as they transition in life. But yeah, selfishly, I missed you, man, so I'm glad to have you back in here. I'm glad to get doing this again.
Yeah, I missed you too. Appreciate the grandma condolences. Gave her a little forehead kiss from you.
Oh, yeah, that's how I used to do it with my grandma. Always a little kiss on the forehead, let her know we loved her. And honestly, man, if there was one person that I could go back and spend a day with in all of history, I would pick my grandma.
Really?
Hands down.
Wow.
Yeah, she was taken way too early. So,
Grandma Hardy?
No, Grandma Tresitter. So she was my mom's mom.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I would. Cool. Of all the people in history, if I could go back and have one day again, it would be with her.
Wow.
She was an unbelievable woman.
Yeah, I mean, grandmothers are kind of the pinnacle of the family, right?
Yeah, and here's just a real brief story on her. She and her brother were orphans. And back when they had orphanages, right, not foster families and stuff. So she was raised most of her life in an orphanage, and, most of their dreams is to get adopted. Well, she got adopted, but the family wouldn't take her brother.
Oh,
and
wow.
She, as soon as she got to the house, she ran away and went back to the orphanage to live the rest of her childhood as an orphan to be with her brother.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Talk about a good sister right there. That's incredible.
Yeah, so it's crazy, man. We sometimes we don't realize the stories that our elders have, and I think that's a disservice not to learn from them and to share. So anytime you get with your grandmothers, your grandfathers, your parents, make sure you spend it and really learn from them.
Amen. Amen. Well, I'm excited to get into today's episode, Jared. You had written a blog, that was the inspiration for our talk today. And our episode is titled, You Good? Are you good? Right? A lot of us, most of us tend to answer, yeah, doing good. How are you doing? I'm good. I'm well. I'm great. Whatever. So this is an interesting topic. Why don't you start us off, Jared? Kind of maybe give a little background on the blog and some of the feedback you received.
Yeah, no, the blog was amazing. A lot of feedback, a lot of people really reflecting, and myself included. And I'll tell you, man, I spent a lot of years of my life not being good and pretending I was. And I can remember when it started is, being a little kid in a military family, we moved a lot. So you kind of put up barriers to not really get to know people because you don't want to be hurt every time you leave your friends. And, excuse me, I think that really transitioned into my adult life. And then as a policeman, like, nobody calls the cops to have them show up at the house to get emotional and start crying with you and really break down. As a policeman, you're supposed to be kind of neutral to the worst of society, neutral to the trauma, the car crashes, the murders. Like, you have a job to do. And unfortunately for me, and I think many of my colleagues, you lose balance in that. And suddenly that same persona of nothing bothers you, you're always good, starts to impact your family, and it starts to impact those that are really around you. And I think, retiring and spending more time with you and with this podcast and really reflecting on where I'm at in my life has opened up my eyes to, man, like, there was a big chunk of my life I didn't get the most out of life. I didn't really get to know people. I didn't enjoy things because I had lost the balance of protecting myself as a professional and then being vulnerable and real with the people that were closest to me.
Yeah. Then that can be difficult to do sometimes, because especially as a father, I'm sure, right, as the male masculine figure, you always want to be good. You always want to be strong. So I can imagine how difficult that can be sometimes.
Yeah, and I think even then you add our military members, our law enforcement, our first responders, it's even more magnified, because not only does your kids and family kind of look up to you as the protector, but society does.
Yeah.
So when are you allowed to not be good? When are
Right.
you allowed to raise your hand and go, guys, I'm not good. Like, this is bothering me.
Right.
And it's really, I think, a big reason why law enforcement suicide rates is ridiculously high, why we have 22 veterans a day killing themselves. We just got to get past this front of I'm good.
Right.
That's what I really want to talk about today and share is how do we start to let people know when we're not good and really be honest with stuff, because here's what I found in my life. When I pretend I'm good, I'm really, really bad. Really bad. Most people would never know this about me. My thoughts aren't good. My just my being isn't what I want to be, right? And it's mostly in my head. Like, you don't necessarily see it outwardly, but when you say you're good, I think there's a balance there, right? Like, part of me is like, I'm saying I'm good and I don't want you to ask anything else. I want to move on. But then there's a whole other side of me that's like begging, like, ask one more question. Because if I keep the not good to myself, I get worse. But as soon as we start to talk about why we're not good, we start to get better.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's where we got to get, and that's where I want this community to go, and I want our listeners to really evaluate, when are we saying we're good and we really know inside we're not? And how do we start to bridge that gap and really take care of one another?
Well, let's start with you, Jared. You admitted that for so many years of your life, you have just simply said, yeah, I'm good. How are you? I'm good, right? To where we can assume that that's most people, that's a high percentage of people. So now today, as a leader, as a coach, how do you respond primarily when people ask, how are you doing, or are you good? Are you still in that majority of just saying I'm good, or are you becoming more vulnerable? Tell us a little bit.
No, I think I've improved a lot. I think in my marriage, in my parenting, I've really started to open up and say, hey, like, I struggled here. I wasn't good there. And I think some of that comes with life experience and reflection and quite honestly, the kind of change in our society now where being vulnerable is actually strong. Faking strength is actually weakness. And I think we're kind of at the forefront with this podcast and our community of really pushing that forward. So I'll tell you, for a quick story, when I was a young cop, and just barely out of training, I had a little girl die in my arms. She was 3. It was awful. And back, this is the mid-'90s. Back then, cops were not allowed to cry. You were not allowed to say stuff bothered you. I mean, I literally still, like, I'll get emotional telling you this because it still bothers me, but she died in my arms. I went home, showered, put on a new uniform, and went back to work for 8 hours.
Jeez.
Right? And I literally was like, gosh, man, why does this bother me? I thought, like guys on the shift knew she died. Like, we knew what I was on. And one of my buddies that we still are in touch with, he was on the call. They knew what we went through, but nobody asked if we were okay.
What?
Nobody asked, like, hey, do you need some help?
And they knew this little girl died in your arms.
We knew it. And then, so I literally, guys, spent 10 years as a policeman. Every time I heard the little medical alert on the radio go off, I'm not kidding you, I could feel my heart start beating. I could start sweating because I would immediately go back to that spot.
Yeah, it's traumatizing.
And I didn't tell anybody about it for years. I thought, well, shit, there's got to be something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Like people die all the time. Like, that's what cops sign up to do. That's what firemen do. That's what ambulance drivers do. Like, we go to the worst of society. Why does this bother me? And what's wrong with me? And that was it wasn't until I was probably 10 or 11, 12 years into my career the first time I ever talked about that to a group of young recruits.
Wow.
And And the message I was sharing with them is, guys, if you're not okay, we got to talk about it. Like, I went through this. I went through dark times. I wasn't the best father. I wasn't the best husband. I wasn't the best policeman. I wasn't the best employee. And it wasn't because I didn't want to be. A lot of times I was scared because I was like, man, if this hurt me that bad, like, if I go to something worse, what's going to bother me?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our listeners and a lot of people in society may not have such a drastic situation, but I think we all have that thing that bothers us and we haven't talked about it.
Why do you think that is, Jared? So is it just habit, right, to where that's just the common thing? How are you? Good. How are you? Or do you think it's expectation, right? Like in the police force, it's expectation for you to always be good. It's expectation for you to go fight crime and, hey, take a shower, change uniform, and continue on. What do you think is the reason why most of us just tend to just write off our emotions and just say we're good, autopilot good, instead of really expressing ourselves?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are afraid to be viewed as weak, right? Like if you and I are engaged in business together and we're having a business lunch or a business meeting, I ask how you're doing and you break down and tell me you're not good, you're struggling. What does that affect our business partnership? Do I want to continue to do business with you, or do I go look for somebody who's faking like they're strong? In the police world, same thing. You know, there's a big stigma in law enforcement, military, and first responders that if you ask for help, if you admit you're not good, you're not going to be able to do your job. They're going to take you off the street. There's something wrong with you. And let's be honest, in society, if I break my arm and you put me in a cast, I have a visual cue to everybody that, hey, I got hurt. Something's wrong with me. But when we're suffering in our heads and we're suffering in our minds, you can't see it. So I think a lot of times we don't talk about it because nobody else can actually see the injury. Nobody else can see what we're processing. So we're afraid they're going to think we're faking it. They're afraid they're going to see us as weak because there's no visual cue to say, hey, man, I'm in a bad spot.
Yeah. And now, so that brings up a good point, because in certain situations, if you have a career like a first responder, policeman, something like that, and you're not doing good, it's hard to be honest, because then you can't do your job, right? So
But see, I think that's a shift.
Okay.
Because here's what I'll tell you. If you get guys like us, and for my law enforcement listeners that actually personally know me, I think, jump on and comment, share this on the video, but I have these discussions now with our young recruits. I have them with the people I get to coach. That, guys, part of training people is not just the physical skills, but training them on how to deal with the stress, how to come forward and talk, and creating a culture where it's okay to not be good. And we're going to take care of you. We're not going to ostracize you. We're not going to talk shit about you. We're not going to make you feel less than. We're going to actually embrace you and go, you know what, motherfucker, I'm glad you're not good. Let's talk about this, because guess what? When I'm not good, I'm going to come back and reciprocate it.
So when do you know when it's the right time to just say you're good, or when it's the right time to be honest?
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? How would you gauge that?
Well, I'm not in a career to where it's cop first responder. Frankly, I would feel that most of the time I would just say I'm good in a career field like that. I feel that most of the time I would feel more compelled to say I'm good. However, today I feel that I've done a much better job too, just in passing. I was just thinking about, I had a rough day last week, and I was getting coffee over here at the Bean Cycle, and the barista asked me, how's your day going today? And I told her, I didn't get too into it. I was like, it's been a tough day, but life has its ups and downs. So I'm grateful even for days filled with adversity. And it just felt good saying that, instead of just just being like, oh, I'm good, just a little bit of expression. And she gave me some words of, oh, well, I hope your coffee will help you get better, or whatever. Just even just expressing it on the surface helped. So for me, I think that it depends, if maybe I was talking to you or someone close, mom, brother, whoever, and they asked me, how are you? I'd probably get a little bit deeper. But I think, at least for me, it depends on who's asking. It depends on who's asking, but I do try and be real. I do try and be real. Luckily, I have a very positive framework, and I'm able to reframe things to be really positive. So if I am in a negative state, it's temporary, but I will allow myself to sit with it, and I will allow myself to express a little bit like, not gonna lie, I'm struggling a little bit today, but life has its ups and downs. It's kind of my go-to way of expressing it on the surface.
Yeah, and I know you haven't done first responder work, but you're training to compete in mixed martial arts. A very macho, very alpha endeavor. If you're not doing well, are you going to tell the sparring partners? Would you come to your...
Yeah.
If I wasn't your coach and we didn't have this relationship,
Uh-huh.
and your coaches were literally, you saw them at the gym, and they were like, gear up, we're getting after it, and you sparred, and you had bloody noses and bruises and testosterone, and you weren't doing good, would you tell them in that setting?
It would have to be, I'd have to be doing pretty badly,
But that's your first responder setting.
Right.
Right, because your bond with that group is going to be very, very tight because you need each other to make each other better.
Right.
And if you and I are sparring, I need you to show up at your best every day to make me better.
Right.
So if you come in and have a down day, mentally down, physically down, one, you're going to physically pay for it because you're going to lose those rounds. Mm-hmm. And then two, who are you going to talk to?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So my story, my analogy is very first responder because it's what I spent 21 years of my life doing. But I think we all have that circle that we're in that we may not be honest with. Right? Because you're absolutely right. You got to time it. And now here's the ironic thing. For me, one of the greatest points of self-discovery and a point where I really got in my life where like, wait a second, my feelings are good. I like crying. I like being nervous and going, oh, right, things aren't right, is actually when I fought. When I took my first fight, I was 42 years old. I was doing it to show my family that dreams are possible. You're never too old to do what you want. And it had been something I wanted to do, and I was like, okay, this is the time. And I had a great team behind me, and we got ready for it. But one of my traditions on every fight day, I would go sit in my backyard and cry. I would literally cry. And people think of me as a generally tough guy. Like I've done some wild things in my life. I would cry.
What would you cry about?
Whatever.
Like what?
Everything. And I started to realize I wasn't crying out of weakness. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was literally crying. What I equated it to is like an awakening because I was about to go out and do something not everybody would do. I was about to go out and really test myself and prove something to myself. And the tears and the emotion and the processing of getting ready of the ups and the downs and the doubts and the beliefs and the I'm the greatest, oh, I'm awful, like all that turmoil finally had a moment where I was going to conquer it. And the tears were just me allowing my whole being, not just my good stuff, not my bad stuff, but all of me to really come to the surface and be expressed. Wow. Yeah, so it's weird because people think of fighting as kind of barbaric, like two guys shirtless in the cage beating each other up, but for me it was a much more spiritual and reflective journey because I got to face my demons. I got to face my doubts. I got to face all my insecurities. I got to build on my strengths. And it was one time in my life, or the first time in my life, that I was truly comfortable with just being me. And if you look back, if you look at what I've done in my life, I wouldn't say I lived silently, but I was very much in the mainstream until that day, until I decided to start to compete in mixed martial arts and really challenge myself. And then everything that came with that, the writing, the storytelling, the being okay, not being good, the internal introspecting and then sharing it. If you look, like that is the day this all took place.
Dang. I can't wait. That's awesome. That is awesome. So how do you know when you're asking someone if they're good, right? Especially you as a coach, as a leader in the community, how do you know when they're not, one? And then how do you decide how to probe, how to dig deeper, what to ask them?
First off, it's your relationship, right? And you got to be genuine to people, and we're really good in today's world of detecting bullshit. If you come up to me and ask how I'm doing, and I say, man, I'm struggling a little bit, I got this going on, and I can tell you're prying to go run to the rumor mill and to share, well, then you've done them a disservice. So I think part of it is that relationship beforehand of just being consistently there for people, and talking with people. And if you really want to get people to share with you when they're not good, share with them when you're not good, right? Like share with, that's what's part great about this podcast and our community is we aren't always good, and we are learning right alongside of you. So if I want you to open up to me, part of that is opening up to them. So for me, it comes down to this: genuine care in that relationship. And I'll tell you, the last couple weeks I had two people that are important to me. When I talked to them, I was like, how you doing? They're like, good. And I was like, I don't believe you. And I just called them on it, because our relationship is that I can be direct with them. And one of them was my son. And I think if I look back, one of my biggest regrets is that I modeled for my kids putting up those barriers. And that's hard for me to accept, and something I'm really working on, because those 20 years that I didn't deal with stuff, that I was like, I'm good, but I wasn't good. Unfortunately, my kids saw that, and that became the norm for them.
Yeah.
And that's how they thought they were doing it. So just last week, I will tell you, I had two people that I talked to. One was my son that said they were good, and I could tell they weren't, so I called him on it. One person got emotional, was like, no, I'm good, and walked away. So at that point, I'm not going to chase you down and beg you to tell me. However, I'm going to make sure you know that I know you're not good, and when you're ready to talk, like, this is where we're going to have it. Like, we're going to have this discussion. My son, I probed a little more. We sat down. I was like, I kind of explained to him this story. Hey, son, I went through a lot of years where I told people I was good, and I was really hurting. I was struggling, and I missed out on a lot of my life pretending I was good. So if you're not good, I'd like to talk about it. And then we literally sat down and had a good half hour, 45-minute conversation, and really got, I'd say, connected on that level, because I had unintentionally modeled for my kids to pretend you're good when you're not.
Yeah.
So I think that's a long way to get to your answer, but I think the big thing is that you got to have that relationship beforehand, and you can't be afraid to follow up with them. If the body language says they're not good, you can see it in their face they're not good, ask. You sure, man? It doesn't seem like you're good. Is there something I can help you with? And I think sometimes we make this out to be bigger than it is. It's literally a follow-up question. It's literally just caring about each other enough to not live on the surface all the time.
Yeah, and it's not just parents, right? It's the way that our society teaches and builds up. I mean, think about your elementary school teachers. Hey, no crying, quiet, hands up, peace, heads up, 7 up, whatever it is, to where we're taught to suppress our emotions. I mean, we have millions of children on ADD, ADHD medicine. You're too hyper, you're too crazy, don't, quiet down, to where we're constantly coached and led to be good.
Not only that, we're expected to be it. And then if you add on top of it, if you're a boy, and I'm guilty of this, when you're a little boy and you get hurt, what's one of the first things Dad will tell you? Quit crying, you're all right. Mm-hmm. Right? Like I literally think back to what a disservice I did as a parent, not actually exploring the feelings.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, we had a whole podcast on parenting, so go back and listen to that. You don't know what you don't know until it's too late. But as society, We fall into these lines with these expectations, and I don't know when it started, but I hopefully we're going to lead that discussion on changing it. But being a man does not mean you have to be good all the time, and it doesn't mean that you got to pretend you are. And I think if we can start to break through some of those barriers and start to set up healthy ways to express when we're not good, that our society will greatly benefit.
Yeah. Yeah, what do you think? What do you think is a tip that we can give to our listeners when they're asking folks, "Are you good?" Maybe, perhaps having that automatic follow-up.
I think just care, man. Just genuinely care, and you don't have to be a policeman or a detective to be able to understand. If you know people in your life, I know what you normally act like on a good day. I know what we act like normal day to day. So if you see somebody that's not at their normal day to day, that's an indicator. Dude, check in with them, right? And slow your life down enough to care about somebody else's life a little bit. I think that's where we can make the biggest impact, because we're all in such a rush to get to the next thing and the next thing. And the reality is, team, life is never about the next thing. It's about getting the journey between them. Right, there's those quotes out there all over the place that life's not a destination, it's a journey. But I think we engage each other and focus so much on relationships that are based on getting from here to there as fast as possible that we don't truly slow down and care or take the time to care about how are you really doing. And those relationships are all you're going to have left at the end of this life, is how you made people feel. You can't take any of your money with you. You can't take your cars. Can't take your clothes.
People don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel.
For sure. Absolutely. So that's what I would stress, man. Just slow down and care about people a little bit. We're in such a fast-paced world where so much information is at our fingertips and we're inundated all the time, that I think that bleeds over into how we interact, and that allows us to say I'm good and just walk away without actually really checking in with each other. And I'm fortunate and that I have a good community around me that we've helped create, to where I have more time with people and I can get to look at, if you're not good, let's sit down and talk about it and create some time where we can really help each other be better.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. So you got to ask yourself, are you good? Ask the people around you, are you good? And it's okay to probe. It's okay to ask follow-up questions. Are you sure? Really checking in and caring about people, like Jared's saying. So, Jared, do we have some purposeful practice to hit on this week?
Yeah, I would love for you guys to reflect on this. This episode's a little shorter, but I think it's pretty impactful. I hope you guys find it to be impactful. But I'd really like you to take inventory and look in the last 2 weeks. How many times have you told someone you were good when you really weren't? Right, and write those down. And to me, like I told you guys before, when I'm not good and I pretend I'm good, I get worse. When I'm not good and I admit it, I start to get better. I start the healing process. And I think that's going to be true for most of us. Then the second one is, how many times in the last 2 weeks have you allowed somebody else to tell you they are good when you knew in fact they weren't, and you didn't follow up with them? And then the third one is, how would allowing yourself to admit when you're not good affect your life? Right? 3 things. But I think of all the podcasts we've done, to me, this is one of the more personal ones, and definitely the one where I can tell you for a fact that when I started to allow myself to not be good all the time, my life got infinitely better. The relationships around me got better, and I got happier.
Yeah.
And then make sure, team, as always, you send in your homework to onpurpose.official@gmail.com. So, Ali, you got anything to wrap them up with this week?
Really just to execute on the purposeful practice. The few on-purposers that are consistently sending it in, we've been able to see a lot of progress, because it is an action item, just like talking about what you're not good with. it helps build you up in the process. So really get that in. It's going to hold you accountable. We love providing feedback, and we're doing this with you. We're doing this with you at the same time. So that's the number one differentiator from the On Purpose podcast to every other podcast, is that we have purposeful practice assignments for each episode on ways to help us all live a more purposeful life.
And I want to remind you guys, we will be having our first On Purpose workshop October 19th. It's a Saturday here in Fort Collins, Colorado. We will be running registration on Eventbrite, so stay tuned for that. It'll be coming out soon. And we appreciate you guys. We got our first little bit of hate mail last week, which I love because it means we're on the right path. So as we collect more hate mail, we want to start doing a little segment where we get to share that with you, and you guys can see what people really think of us, or at least some of the people think of us, because it's kind of funny.
Yeah, if you don't have haters, you ain't pushing hard enough.
Yeah, and we don't want to sit in that comfort zone, just like we don't want you sitting in your comfort zone. So I appreciate you guys tuning in this week. Remember, team, life is too short to live any other way than on purpose. So get that homework in, and we'll see you all next week.